So today, we're very lucky, and I'd like to, on behalf of ARC Worldwide and the Path to Purchase Institute, welcome Mike as he tells us how he's been creating a powerful brand, one dirty job at a time. Welcome, Mike.
Hello. How's it going? Oh, good. Rhetorical questions are almost never answered in my world. It's nice to hear people actually say something. I didn't think that I would ever say this sentence. It is a thrill, an honor, and a gigantic relief on a personal level to be here with you today at the Chicago Westin Airport Hotel. I say that not just because I'm a big fan of O'Hare and Westin, and that you all seem like lovely people, but this time, 72 hours ago, I was face down in a tent of sorts in a town called P2PI. Anyone been to P2PI? Of course not. It's in the middle of Southeast Australia, about 10 hours north of Adelaide. I was there for the Discovery Channel shooting Dirty Down Under. Thank you. I assure you it is. So P2PI is this little mining town, opal mining town, truly in the middle of the outback. And we were there profiling opal miners, and something interesting happened a month ago in P2PI. It rained. They got 5 inches of rain. Normally they get 1 inch a year. And the result of all of the rain in P2PI, there were a number of things that happened, but the fascinating one was that in roughly 100 million tons of kangaroo poo spread out over the outback, flies began to emerge at a rate never before seen. And most of them came to P2PI. And the majority of those that came landed on my face for about 5 days in a row. It was extraordinary. My crew and I had never seen this kind of activity before in the animal kingdom, which is just a long way of saying, say what you want about the Westin Hotel here outside of Chicago O'Hare. I've been here nearly a day, and there are no flies at all. So it's great to be here, and I noticed from the, from the board I saw when I came in, and from a conversation last night with my friends at Rock 10 over at Gibson's, by the way, Craig, thank you so much. You're probably here somewhere. But I noticed that I would be speaking on building a brand, which is a first for me. Typically, I'm hired by companies who want me to talk to their employees about exploding toilets or misadventures in animal husbandry or flies or whatever. There's a real hunger today for people, I think, to feel grateful for the jobs that they have, especially among their bosses. And so that's typically what I'm asked to do. The business of talking about a brand is, well, I've been thinking about it for a long time, but nobody ever asked me for my opinion on it. And this morning over breakfast, I was talking with my partner, Mary, and I said, you know, why is this so awkward for me to do? I'm never really at a loss for words, but I began to think about the business of building a brand, and the first thing that makes it challenging is the fact that, to me anyway, it just sounds so daggone presumptuous to stand before people and say, let me tell you how I did this thing. It's really easy and it's really tempting, I think, for anybody who's had any measure of good fortune to look back on events and sort of retrofit them, you know, and connect the dots and say, let me tell you how I did it. I don't want to do that, and I wouldn't even know how to pretend to do it, because there are many, many dots and the connections are utterly and completely random. But the other thing that makes it challenging is that, you know, as we talked and started to distill as best I could just a couple of things that I'm absolutely certain of, I realized that the two things about building a brand, of which I am completely sure, are diametrically opposed to each other, which will make me sound a bit schizophrenic, but that's okay, because that's where I am. The first thing is authenticity, and we talked about this at dinner last night. If there's anything for sale today, it has to be the notion of being authentic. Viewers want it, consumers want it, we're desperate to have it, and if you guys are like me, you're probably sick of hearing the word. Everybody's talking about it, and I'm aware that it exists, and like everybody else, I'm anxious to be perceived as an authentic guy. The other thing about building a brand that strikes me as really important and relevant is control. So I'm looking at authenticity and I'm looking at control, and I'm trying to figure out what's certain about both of those things. So here's what I believe is certain about authenticity. Every single successful brand that I've seen today, with no exceptions, is authentic to itself. And here's the other thing I believe. Anybody who ever sets out to build an authentic brand with purpose, deliberateness, and intentionality is therefore fundamentally inauthentic. I really believe it. We had a company come to us maybe a year and a half ago and said, look, here's what we want to do, Mike. We've got it all mapped out. We've got storyboards, we've got a script, we've got this great idea. We want you to appear in one of the most successful viral videos of all time. And I said, well, which one? I said, well, we haven't done it yet, but when we release it, it's going to go viral and it's going to be huge, and here's how we're going to do it. I'm like, you can't release a viral video. You can release a video and hope it goes viral. You can build a brand and hope it becomes authentic. But Coco Chanel had it right. She said years ago, authenticity always matters, but in hard times, nothing matters more. And the last 6 or 7 years have been tough in my industry and in yours and in the whole country. So authenticity is now the coin of the realm, and as I look back and try and make sense of the intro that Nick just gave me and how all of those good things happened through the filter of authenticity, I find myself somewhat at odds. So what I'll do is just talk a little bit about how Dirty Jobs happened and how some of the other partnerships that came about began to evolve, and about that specific point in time, which for me was late in 2007, where I tried to deliberately do a thing and began to connect some of these dots. Because again, if my theory's right, and authenticity is important, and deep down none of us really have control over that which we hope to build, then an authentic brand is the product of two things. A lot of personal, internal choices that are made separate and apart from everything else, and then some external circumstances that are completely out of our control that will eventually come about. And with luck, there'll be a nexus, a coming together of things. That's what happened for me. I suspect that's what happened with some other brands. So let me just kind of walk you through what happened with Dirty Jobs. And let me start by asking, I hope it's not too leading or obvious, but you guys are familiar with the show, right? Okay, I mean, no, it's not. I'll take the applause, cheap though it is, but quick show of hands. Has anyone not seen the program? It's okay if you haven't. Anyone not familiar? You, ma'am? Get out. What's your name? Gloria? Victoria has never seen Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe. This is devastating. Victoria, Dirty Jobs is the simplest show in the history of the world, with the possible exception of The Gong Show, all right? Nothing ever really happens except for the fact that everything happens, but nothing is planned. There is no script, there are no actors. It is utterly unscripted. There is no production, there's no pre-production, there's no rehearsal, there's no take two in the history of Dirty Jobs, except for me doing a stand-up talking directly to the camera. We've never done a second take. We do our best to authentically portray a day of work, and I do my best to keep up as an erstwhile apprentice. And what happens during the shooting is surprisingly honest and surprisingly authentic. At least it has been over the years. But the way it happened is completely serendipitous and random. In 2001, I was called by an executive producer over at CBS who was working in San Francisco, and he asked me if I could fill in for a host for a show called Evening Magazine. You guys have seen Evening or PM Magazine, it's been around forever. So at the time I was freelancing and always willing to do something for a few months, so I went to San Francisco and I started to impersonate a host. And honestly, that had been my model for over a decade. I've done a lot of things. I home shopping, infomercials, I sang in the opera, I hosted things, I did pilots, and so this was just another gig. And I moved to San Francisco, and my friend said, you can do anything you want with this show. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, anything you want. And I said, well, that might be interesting. My granddad was 92 at the time and failing, and he was one of those guys, you know him. I mean, you don't know him by name, but everybody's got somebody like this in their life. He only went to the 8th grade, but by the time he was 30, he was a master carpenter, plumber, steam fitter, pipe fitter, architect. He built the house I was born in without a blueprint, right? And anytime I popped up on TV in his life, he wound up throwing a beer can at it because he was horrified by the choices of his grandson. What I wanted to do was follow in his footsteps and learn a trade, but that wasn't for me. He suggested I get a different toolbox, so I got into entertainment. Next thing I know, I'm in San Francisco impersonating a host for Evening Magazine, and my boss is saying, you can do whatever you want to do. And I said, I want to do a show about work. My granddad's getting old, and I want to find guys like him who are willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done, and let's just meet them and profile them. He said, I don't care, whatever, just do it. First, the segment was called Somebody's Got to Do It, and I went out in Oakland, and I gathered the semen from a bull and artificially inseminated a cow with a preacher who was a dairy farmer during the week and a preacher on the weekend. This all sounded so impossibly delightful and weird that I had to do it. And so we cut together this crazy segment with bulls and cows and a sermon, and I went to church, and then I did something unspeakable to a bull, and then I got a cow pregnant. And I put it on the air at 7 p.m., where a lot of people were having their meatloaf in San Francisco. And it was unusual. Nobody had seen anything like that. And I know this because I got letters saying, nobody's ever seen anything like this, and maybe 1,000 letters from viewers. And it was interesting. There was an equal mix of outrage and delight, which is pretty much what you're looking for with TV, right? So I say to my boss/friend, I'm like, hey, I think we got something here. He's like, whatever, just keep doing them. So I said, okay. So for the next year, we went looking to profile workers. Somebody's Got to Do It became a local thing. My friend got fired, as all my friends eventually do, and a new general manager came in and was horrified by Somebody's Got to Do It. And then I was fired, which of course I eventually always am. But I had this tape, and I had this idea, and I began to try and sell the notion of work on TV. Now, today, people say, yeah, duh. But in 2002, it was weird. You got to remember, reality TV was Survivor, Real World, and something on Fox called When Pets Attack Their Owners, or some stuff. Right? There was no Deadliest Catch. There was no Dirty Jobs. There was no Axemen or Ice Road Truckers. There was no Swamp Loggers or Swamp People. There was no Gold Rush or Bering Sea Gold. Today, there are over 30 shows on the air that were pulled directly from segments on Dirty Jobs. But in 2002, there was no Dirty Jobs. There was just nothing. And so trying to sell this thing from a branded standpoint, are you kidding me? Forget about it. I'm a guy who just got fired with some very suspicious tape full of images that might be illegal in a lot of states. And I'm going to PBS going, I think your viewers will love it. And they're like, no, it's too gross for us. Well, it's not gross enough for Fox. It's too funny for CBS, but it's not funny enough for Comedy Central. It's too irreverent for NBC, but not, too irreverent enough for Showtime, and on and on. Nobody wanted it. A year later, I'm still sort of freelancing and looking for work, and I have another idea for my dream job, which is to be the Discovery guy. I'd worked for the Discovery Channel off and on for a few years, and I had this idea, a very general, branded notion. Didn't have much to do with Somebody's Got to Do It, but I was watching the Discovery Channel one night, and I got so frustrated because there was another guy on there telling me how stupid I was vis-a-vis how big his brain was. you know? And I'm just like, God, I'm just so tired of listening to experts. So I took a meeting over at Discovery, and I went and I said, here's what I think. I think you guys need another host, like you need a hole in the head. This whole industry, I'm tired of experts. I bet your viewers are too. What you need is a fan. You need a viewer with access, and you need to give this viewer a camera crew. And you need to send this viewer with his camera crew all around the country to do cool stuff. And I think that's a show. And they were like, well, where would you go? And I'm like, hey, let's go to the Titanic. Let's go to Everest. Let's go to North Africa and dig up tombs with famous archaeologists. But let's do it from the point of view of a viewer and not an expert. That was my big pitch. They said, you know what? Probably won't work, but let's try it. So we made a deal. We identified a series of expeditions, and then as an afterthought, they said, you know what would be nice is to have like a mini-series, like 3 hours of you doing something that we can put on the air and use as a promotional vehicle, primarily, to introduce you to the fans so they understand, you know, who's going to be going on these auditions. And I said, okay, what do you want to do? And they said, we don't know. What do you want to do? I'm like, somebody's got to do it. I'm like, what's that? So I show them the tape, and they're like, this is a talk show in a sewer. And I said, yes. Yeah, it's a talk show in a sewer. That's what I want to do. And they're like, we don't want to do that. And I said, come on, you know, I'm going to do this thing. If you send me to Everest, come on. They said, okay, whatever. So I went back and I reshot some of those early segments, and Discovery put it on the air. And a crazy thing happened. Same response as I got in San Francisco. People liked it. But nowadays, when there's real tension with a hit that has a problem, like on network, it's usually, okay, we've got this critically acclaimed show, Arrested Development, right? But nobody's watching it. So the network is proud of this Emmy-winning thing, but their audience, so eventually it goes. In cable, it's different, especially back in 2003. Because as you guys know, there's this eternal struggle between brand and program, right? And Discovery has a brand, and History Channel had a brand, and A&E, Arts and Entertainment, they got a brand, Dog the Bounty Hunter, whatever. So, I mean, but you see how programs and brand, you know, really started to collide in my industry. But back then, the tension came between, well, what do you do with a show that people watch that is considered to be off-brand? It's a real problem at Discovery. And the way they solved that problem was they didn't order any more dirty jobs. The guy who made that decision is gone now, but at the time they were like, look, this is off-brand, nice show, but why don't you go to Egypt and do the thing we talked about? And then, you know, we got this thing up in Alaska with crab fishermen. Why don't you go up there and work on that? And I started doing these other things, and it was fine. You know, my grandfather did have a chance to see the show before he passed away, and I felt pretty good about that, but I also felt like there was a missed opportunity. While I was up in Alaska catching crabs, awful sentence. While I was up in Alaska, though, an executive at the network took the show to Vegas, ran it through a focus group, and the numbers that came back really were promising. So they put it on the air again, and they looked at it, and they said, you know what? We'll give this thing a try. So they ordered 13. And so we started shooting Dirty Jobs late in 2004. And they put it on the air in 2005. And it's been on the air ever since, but from 2005 to 2007, it was really interesting. The show continued to grow, the audience continued to be there, a brand started to form, but there was still this tension with brand versus program. And there was still a real issue at the network about what to do with this show. So it really wasn't promoted, but it was still growing. And me, I was just trying to be as authentic as I could. All I was doing was working. At this point, we had been to maybe 25 different states. We had done 100 different jobs. We did a big 100-job special which a bunch of people watched, but nobody promoted. But we were there in a very honest, very consistent, very authentic way doing our show. You know, I was taking the crew and putting them on camera. I was doing everything I could to eliminate what I believe are barriers to authenticity. You know, if you start thinking about the things we do to make sure an authentic experience doesn't happen at the same time we tell ourselves an authentic experience is precisely what we're going to try and create, it'll make you cry. So I was, you know, single-handedly with my crew trying to eliminate barriers to authenticity. This is just a side note, because what really happened that changed my model was the economy had a little hiccup in 2007. And then, late in 2007, the economy just crapped the bed, right? I mean, it went bad. And all of a sudden, and I mean, it felt like overnight, but it probably took a couple of months, but all of a sudden, dirty jobs became this thing. Like I said, Victoria, it's the simplest show ever done. But the thing about dirty jobs is there are themes in it. And we don't make a big deal about them, but they're very complicated and very large and very universal. The definition of a good job, the nobility of work, the importance of trying, the necessity of failing in public. You know, these are all big things. And you know, back in the day, if you'd asked me, I'd said, yeah, I guess that's my brand. Those things are important to me. But they were tenets of the show first. And there was really very little difference between me and the show. And so by 2007, without really knowing it, I had been a very consistent, regular presence doing a very consistent, regular thing, not just on the Discovery Channel, but remember, Discovery's most trusted name in nonfiction media. So I've got bona fides that I'm not completely aware of. And the show is beginning to take its shape. And then, of course, the thing you can't control happened. This event that all of a sudden took those themes and dirty jobs and made them relevant in a way that nobody at the network ever imagined, and I certainly didn't think would ever happen. And that was crazy. I mean, I can't even tell you how odd it was to all of a sudden, I'm not changing my behavior, I'm still out promoting the show as best I can, but 4 things happened over the course of 2 weeks, and I can remember them all very clearly, and believe me, I'm bringing this back to that point where suddenly you realize, wait a minute, maybe this is a brand. The first one was at the Tonight Show. I was backstage waiting to be introduced, and Jay Leno starts his thing. And I'd been on before, and Jay's a nice guy, and then he says, and he's back, give him a big hand, hero to the working man, Mike Rowe. And I'm like, what? Have the standards for hero fallen so far in the working man category? That's weird. But I made a note, you know, because I hadn't heard it like that before. A week later, an article in Time magazine came out, and I had done this interview a couple of months before, but it was a 2-page spread, and it was about me, and it was about dirty jobs, and the headline said, America's most famous chronicler of work. I'm like, what? Studs Terkel was still alive when this thing came out. You got the wrong guy, you know? A week after that, Larry King calls me the hardest working guy in show business. I'm like, no, that's James Brown, man. What do you... So, like, in pop culture, people started saying very nice things about me that I personally didn't necessarily concur with, but it just felt like, why is everybody all of a sudden looking at this show? And the reason, of course, was because everything we thought we knew about work was being challenged in the whole country. The definition of a good job was up for debate. And dirty jobs, all of a sudden, was sitting there as this homage to work. I mean, we feature people week after week who will do whatever it takes to put food on the table. And suddenly it became an anthem. And it put me in a place where I really didn't mean to be, but I couldn't pretend I wasn't. The 4th thing that happened wasn't really pop culture. It was a financial writer for the Wall Street Journal. He called me. I was painting a bridge up in Mackinac, right? I mean, just in the middle of work, and I get this call on the cell phone. His name was Anton something or other. He said, Mike, it's Anton over at the Wall Street Journal. Just wondered if you had any comment on the latest employment numbers. Like, who's this? He goes, you know, I mean, I'm a fan of the show, you know, wife watches it with me, the kids love it, everybody digs it, and, you know, I'm just looking here at two numbers which appear to be completely divergent and counterintuitive, and I've wondered if you'd like to weigh in. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about, you know? He said, well, obviously, that was 8.1% unemployment at the time. We'd just gone over 8, it was big news, but there was another number which was alarming, and that was the widening skills gap. So here we are in 2008, higher unemployment than we've seen in a generation, but at the same time, fewer plumbers, electricians, steam fitters, pipe fitters, welders, right? So we've got this shortage in the skilled trades. At the same time, we can't find people, people can't find work, and I've got this show who's sort of celebrating the kinds of jobs that appear to be in short supply. So he wants to know what my theory is and how I might be able to reconcile these dichotomous data points. So I say, well, obviously, here's the problem. I'm on a bridge just making shit up, you know? I mean, but I said, no, look, here's the problem. Our country has waged a war on work. We have been celebrating something entirely different than we used to. And you can see it everywhere you look. He said, what do you mean? I'm like, what's the best-selling book this week? It happened to be written by a friend of mine, Tim Ferriss, but it's called The 4-Hour Workweek. The 4-Hour Workweek, okay, that's the bestseller. How to work 4 hours a week and get everything you want. Give me a break. Right? That's how we wage war on work. Show me a plumber on TV. I'll show you a 300-pound guy with a giant butt crack and a tool belt, okay? That's how we portray work. Everything that we're doing, to me, in 2008, seemed to be a kind of schizophrenic rejection of traditional work. And everything on dirty jobs appears to be a traditional embrace of the very same thing. And so I realized on the bridge, talking to Anton, why I was getting these calls. It wasn't because I was all that in a bag of chips, it was because there's nobody else in the space. There's just nobody there. I mean, yeah, you could have called Jesse James, he would have hung up on you, right? You could have called, you know, the American Chopper guys. Actually, you couldn't call them. There was just nobody else out there who was willing to talk about this. So I said to my partner, Mary, I said, you know, there's something here way bigger than the show. So what would happen if, in an authentic way, we tried to, I won't say build a brand, but control this notion of authenticity? And how could I maybe go beyond the show and grow this thing in a way that won't spoil it in spite of my purposeful attempts? So, you know, we had a few drinks and we started talking about, would it be possible to grow a brand through partnerships with other successful brands? And typically, a guy in my position can't do that because, you know, contracts and exclusivities, endless paperwork, agency conflicts, management firms, PR people. But see, the thing is, being a moron, I didn't have any of those things. I didn't have an agent. I didn't have a manager. I didn't have a PR company. Now, I got nothing bad to say about those three things, but they are part of the machine, right? And when I talked before about barriers to authenticity, I'm sorry, but they can be barriers. They can also be facilitators. But in my business and in my experience, it all just, I had so many friends, you know, and still have friends who are in the industry, but they're cobbled by the incredibly glittery, top-heavy infrastructure that is their business. And they can't move fast and they can't make multiple deals. So I wanted to do something that would allow me to accomplish a few things. A, give back to the show. B, promote the show in a way that surpassed exploding toilets and misadventures in animal husbandry. And most importantly, create a filter through which a variety of relationships could pass that would allow me to remain authentic while speaking on behalf of a lot of other companies. that entity became a thing called Microworks. Microworks was me challenging the fans of Dirty Jobs to help me answer Anton's question from the Wall Street Journal in an affirmative way. In other words, you got a skills gap with rising unemployment. What do we do about that? We champion the trades. How do we do that? We build an online trade resource center that parents can go to with their kids that make a case for the very jobs that are going wanting. Fans of the show built the resource center. Mary and I got it online. People started to come, and people liked it. So now when I go on Jay Leno, and he says, "What's new?" I don't have to tell him, about flies in Cooper-Pedy, or, the camel that kicked me in the bad place, although those are good stories. I can say, what's new is we're celebrating the plumber in a way that we've never done before, and I can tell a better story. So that all started to work, and the website started to get bigger. And then we set up a foundation and began to give money away to kids who were willing to take the time to learn a skill and master a trade. We began to buy their tools upon graduation. And this is not just cause-related marketing. I'm familiar enough with that. But for it to be authentic, I had to own it. I had to have my name in it. I had to talk about it, and I had to mean it. But we also wanted to build the whole business. And so that conversation I had with Discovery back in the day about you don't need another expert, you don't need another host, I began to have with companies like Ford and Caterpillar and Motorola and HP and Wolverine and Masterlock. Who am I forgetting? Lee, VF Corp, right? There was a time when I think we were in business with maybe 10 different billion-dollar companies contemporaneously. And the way we did it was to simply say, look, you don't need another spokesman. You need a customer. You need a fan. You need a fan of your cars and trucks. You need a fan of your jeans. You need a fan. And to the extent that I'm able to, I want to talk to your customers through that lens. I can't be the Discovery guy. I can't be the Ford guy. But I can be somebody who likes the stuff you make. And if you let me tell it in those terms, and at the same time support my foundation, and at the same time let me be a part of the overarching narrative, then we don't have an endorsement deal, we have a partnership, or at least a relationship. And those things can exist at the same time. So from 2008 to 2011, we started to focus on the business. Dirty Jobs stays on the air. And despite a lot of pressure to kind of fox it up, John Stamos joins Mike's tonight in the sewer, no. I don't want to do that, all right? I don't want to do that. I just want to keep the show as it is. Anonymous people in towns you can't find on a map doing the kinds of jobs that make civilized life possible for the rest of us. My job was to keep doing that show, and at the same time, try and take a little bit of that DNA and put it into the relationships that we have. Now, while all of this is happening, of course, very fortunate to have interest from a lot of different companies, and we say no a lot. You have to, obviously. The companies we say yes to, it either has to be a lot of fun, it has to fit with Microworks, it has to make authentic sense. Most deals won't. But the interest that came from the most obvious place and the most interesting kind of deal we could ever do would, of course, been in the cleaning space. I'm a filthy pig, right? I mean, I make my living crawling through sewers. Anybody who ever made a cleaning product ever called us. And we said no to all of that, even the ones that made sense, because we figured somewhere down the line, if you're ever actually going to do it yourself, right? I mean, that's the category you want to hang on to. So that's a very long way of saying that what's happened over the last 10 years has led to a place where, for the first time, hopefully in an authentic way, I'm going to try and talk about cleaning products. And it's hard to even say it out loud because I I'm the guy who gets dirty. And so we're going to have a big conversation, and we've already had one, about how to constantly reconcile that. There's an easy enough way to do it, and I've got 20 minutes left, and I want to take some questions, so I'll just close this part of it with the story that really brought me here. There's a big awards ceremony. You guys all know it. What's it called? Where P&G was Marketer of the Year. So the Marketer of the Year was, I think it's the ANA, maybe. Do you guys know this? It's a big deal, right? And they asked me to MC it. I don't remember where it was, but the Marketer of the Year was a guy named Stengel. He worked for Procter & Gamble for years, and I introduced him. And before he came up, they sent somebody on stage as his proxy, and it was Mr. Clean. All right, it's a giant, sexually ambiguous sailor with a giant wicker basket full of cleaning products. And he comes out, haha, very funny. Mr. Dirty and Mr. Clean are together. And, everybody laughed. And I said something smart alecky to Mr. Clean. And everybody laughed. I don't remember what I said, but Mr. Clean kind of leans into me and says, I can't talk. I can't talk. I'm like, what'd you say? It's like, and then I realized he's like Mickey Mouse. Mr. Clean, he's an icon and he's not allowed to talk. So, in that moment, I was like, oh, this is so interesting. One of the most recognizable icons in the world can't articulate the very essence of the brand he represents. I can. So I was like, note to self, one day, somehow or another, I want to get in a place where I can talk about a cleaning product, not by nature of its virtues, and not by nature of its many features and benefits, but I want to be able to say dirt is good, work is good. And whether you're working hard or playing hard, it's just dirt. It'll wash off. My stuff will do that. Are there any questions? Right? That's what I want to be able to do, and that's what's brought us here. Thanks. You've been very kind.